let's begin our presentation with Diane Stair-Fenner. Go ahead, Diane.
Hi, thanks so much, Giselle. This is Diane Stair-Fenner, and I'm navigating this new platform. And Lydia from Colorín Colorado will share more information about the resource page during her portion of the presentation. So I'm going to get us started. I'm Diane Stair-Fenner, coming to you today from Fairfax, Virginia, near Washington, D.C., and I'm the president of SupportEd. And this is my Twitter handle if we don't already know each other on Twitter. So today I'm going to be starting off our conversation talking about four things. The first are challenges and opportunities for English learners and their teachers during this time. Then I'll share some highlights of a SupportEd webinar we did last month on English learners and distance learning. Then I'll give some professional development recommendations, and I'll end with a piece about parenting, educators, and empathy. So to start off with challenges and opportunities, I wanted to share with you just a general landscape of what's happening in the U.S. nationally in terms of school closures. So as of a couple of days ago, this is what we look like. We see a lot more states in that dark purple color that have decided to close for the academic year. Maybe in the chat, if you want to share what your state policy is right now. How long are you closed? Right now. For example, I'm in Virginia, and our schools closed pretty early on for the rest of the year, and now others have been following suit, but some are still just closed into May, or they're recommending closure. So, you know, we're all kind of in a different state right now, but like I said, most states are closed for the end of the year. So we know, of course, there's so many challenges right now in these times of distance learning, which we're all navigating, and was not expected that we've had to just change our practices so quickly. And here are a few challenges. For example, scaffolding content materials for our English learners. Many of our English learners, or ELLs, do not have access to technology. A lot of our families are out of work, and they're undergoing financial difficulties right now. A lot of our students have to care for siblings, either while the parents work, or there might be someone who's sick in the family. There might have been death in the family and other trauma of that nature. We know that our English learners' exposure to English is probably being greatly reduced right now. So that's an additional challenge. It's a challenge to establish routines for children when things are changing from a day-to-day basis, especially when families might be prioritizing health or food or work. And finally, there's just a huge sense of anxiety right now in terms of students and families and teachers as well. We don't know what's going to happen in many cases in the next school year. I'm wondering myself, you know, I have three kids of my own. Are they going back in the fall? What's the fall going to look like? So we have lots of sources of anxiety right now. And I see someone in the chat is saying that they have high school students who are working. Absolutely. So, and when they're out and about working, they could be putting their health at risk too. So we know there's a lot going on. But I was also asked to look at what might some potential opportunities be right now. So, you know, we definitely want to look at both sides of the equation. Distance learning might be working well for students who are a little bit more quiet naturally, or students who feel anxiety when they go to school for whatever reason. Maybe some students are being bullied at school or don't feel comfortable. This might be a time for students to really discover what their own interests are outside of school, or maybe they have a little bit more time to delve into a particular content area. They can be working on developing their home language with their parents or caregivers or with their siblings. There are a lot of opportunities right now also for students to write in different formats and to journal and to explore what that might look like. Some kids are benefiting from having directions recorded and repeated. We can't do that during face-to-face instruction. So some kids are, hitting that replay and listening one more time or two more times. Some students are being able to experience more choice right now in terms of what they can be doing, like in choice boards that teachers are giving. Some students are having small group instruction over virtual platforms. And that's been helpful, too, to check in, and Larry, I'm sure, will share more about this, to see how kids are doing, looking social, emotionally at our students, and for them to share how it's going. And finally, students, this is a time for some students to build up those time management skills and independent skills as possible. So I want to share just kind of giving the landscape of what's happening nationally and what some challenges and opportunities might be. I wanted to look at some highlights of a webinar that we at SupportEd hosted on March 18th. This was shortly after some schools shut down. Not all of them have been closed down yet. And I do want to share that when we say school closure, maybe, the brick and mortar schools might be closed, but we really want to recognize that the learning is happening. The teachers are doing such a fabulous job. Kids are, engaging to the point that they can. So when we say school closure, it just means that the physical school might be closed, but we are still working so hard and diligently on education. So on our webinar about a little more than a month ago, we had a guest speaker, Jeannie Krimmel, and she's an instructional coach who's been teaching English learners solely in she calls it a cyber context, the distance learning context. So we're going to be giving a link to this webinar. So she had been doing this for a long time. So when schools, physical buildings were closing, she had a lot of great insights to share with us. So she shared these 4 objectives, and I'll just pull out a couple of highlights of the webinar. So she shared some considerations for distance learning, some technology suggestions, some strategies, and then some web resources. And she had so much to share that we put together a Padlet. We pulled together these resources on distance learning for English learners, and here's the link to it. And it's going to be shared again on the Colorín Colorado resource page as well. So we grouped all of the recommendations and resources here at SupportEd, and we have also we continue to refresh this as we learn of new resources because we're learning of new ones every day. So in terms of technology suggestions, Jeannie Krimmel shared a few things, and also internet alternatives and workarounds, and I know Larry's going to be addressing some of this later. She shares that you can email and text students or families if they have phones. If they don't have any access to technology, you can be using paper packets. I know that many districts are doing that. Kids can pick them up or they're getting mailed home, for example. Assigning tech buddies, so setting up a student maybe with a sibling or someone else in the class they can be helping each other out with the technology if they're able to connect and get online. And I've been hearing wonderful things, for example, about school buses providing Wi-Fi access, parking in neighborhoods. So it's amazing all of the creative ways that people have been able to come together in this crisis. She also suggested giving keyboard practice links so kids can practice typing. This is a skill that, they might not have gotten so much, but now when we're relying on technology, it might be a chance to help them beef up those skills a little. Also, clear and frequent communication by email, text. I've seen some instances on Twitter of people, mailing things home to students and it really making their day. And finally, she mentioned some platforms to facilitate online learning, like we're seeing people use Google Classroom, Zoom, Canvas, for example. Here I'm in Fairfax County. We're using Blackboard Collaborate, and that's been interesting. It wasn't quite working so well the first few weeks, but they've worked out all of the bugs there, thankfully. So Jeannie she also shared 2 types of distance learning for ELLs, either synchronous or asynchronous, and shares some definitions and advantages for English learners and also some disadvantages to both. And Larry's going to be talking Larry's going to be talking about, what both of these look like and what he might recommend. So we encourage you to consider these two environments. And you've had now a few weeks to make sense of distance learning. And maybe in the chat you could talk about what's been working for you so far. Synchronous or asynchronous instruction, or a combination of both. And in terms of planning lessons, I'd like to share our 5 steps for scaffolding lessons, and we've adapted this for distance learning context. And this comes from our book with Sydney Snyder, Unlocking English Learners' Potential. And we have a 5-step process for scaffolding lessons, but we want to adapt that for distance learning. So we want to know, first of all, know your students and their context. For example, who might be going through trauma? Who's taking care of siblings? Who's working? Who has enough food? And then identify the language or skills students need for the lessons that they're going to be working on in distance learning, which will take a lot of collaboration with content teachers. And then scaffolding the lesson for distance learning, and I'm going to show you some examples of what this could look like. Then we want to make sure that the materials we select and develop are appropriate and relevant to this new context. And then finally, teaching the lesson, and we want to check in with students, how did it go? What do I need to adapt? And so here's an example of some challenges we might see with activity packets. This might look familiar to you, where students have, for example, in math, they have a spinner. They have to write 2-digit numbers and create a spinner, use a paper clip. We see that it's in Spanish, which is great, but this makes a lot of assumptions for our students, that we're assuming that they're literate, that they have paper, index cards, pencils, and paper clips, and that they have lots of mathematical background. So be thinking about these lessons and tasks you're seeing, and if they might be valid for English learners. But here's an idea, and this comes from Wanda Gonzalez Crespo from Reading School District in Pennsylvania. Both of these examples sharing, can we create tasks more with our English learners in mind? Maybe using more things that they would have naturally in their homes, like silverware, for example, or have kids pour sand or salt onto a cookie sheet and draw numbers that way. So these are always good things to keep in mind. And we also, of course, want to be scaffolding tasks. So here's an example of some scaffolds that you could be sharing with content teachers: providing home language support, having audio instructions, which are super helpful. Also a video to build background knowledge for students, just a quick video in the home language or in English, for example. And sentence frames to allow the students to complete the task. So these are some methods that we could be using. So this is a very quick overview. And so I want to share a few recommendations about professional development during this time. So I want to talk about first kind of the dream, and then, what's our reality right now? So the dream, and this is synthesized from a white paper from Linda Darling-Hammond and her team. So we want PD that's content-focused. We want it to be active, job-embedded, focusing and highlighting collaboration, modeling what effective practice looks like. We want, to be continuous, giving coaching and expert support, providing a lot of reflection and feedback, and having it be sustained. So this is the dream, when we're able to meet face-to-face and have these conversations. But a little bit of the reality, I'm coming up with a couple of acronyms for you today. But the reality is more like these criteria, but we can really get at the dream through this new framework. So we want our professional development to be applicable right now to what we're doing and what we're being asked to do with distance learning. So we also need it to be convenient. It's got to be, a lot of us have a lot of things going on. We're teaching classes. We might have our own children or parents or family members to take care of. We might have other commitments, other jobs we're trying to maintain, for example. So it's got to be convenient. It's got to really work with our schedules. And it also has to be engaging. So right now, this is a great example of engaging PD. You're able to contribute. You're able to collaborate, even online. And it's also got to be short. Our attention span when we're working in a virtual environment, I'm sure you found with your students, is a lot shorter. And many of us are on virtual meetings a lot throughout the day. So it's got to be in short increments. So maybe an hour, a couple of hours tops. So those are my recommendations. So maybe in the chat you can share what's been working for you in terms of professional development. So I also wanted to share there's so many wonderful online English learner professional development options. And these are, Lydia on Colorín Colorado is going to be sharing these as well. So these are just, maybe about 10 right now that have wonderful options, a lot of free PD out there. Some of it is for a fee, but, I'm really impressed by how much free PD is coming out so far. So definitely take a look at any of these resources I'm sharing with you. And if you have more, share them also in the chat if there are any other PD options that I haven't mentioned. And I want to end with a piece on just seeing this now from the parent side. It's really given me a window, an even deeper window into my own kids' learning. My kids are in 5th, 7th, and 9th grades. They attend 3 different schools. And as I mentioned, in Fairfax County, we're the 10th largest district in the U.S., and the county has a very strong focus on equity for all students. And for many reasons, we were not able until this week to really get a synchronous learning distance plan in place. So we've had our share of challenges. And I've reflected on it a lot and thought about what this means for parents. And, I'm talking to my kids' teachers a lot more. I'm sure you as teachers are engaging with parents even more than you would be in a face-to-face environment. So I wanted to look at first, reflecting on what is our hierarchy of needs right now? And it's really important to think of what that means for you. So this, you might be familiar, getting a drink of water, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which was a theory from 1943. And our biggest need are the physiological needs. We need all of these things to be able to then move up the pyramid and to look at safety, and then love and belonging, and then esteem, and finally self-actualization. But I've been struggling with a lot of this, all of the changes that are happening, all the uncertainty, and I came up with my own hierarchy of needs. And this, to me, I've adapted it for my experiences so far with COVID. And I have to share that, I'm really lucky. I've got a job. I can work from home. My kids have devices. I'm able to, not have to be on the front lines. But I had to rework this for my own sanity, really, to help me cope and help me prioritize what my needs are and what my kids' needs are right now. So looking at this, what's your top need, would you say? So add it in the chat. But to me, it was safety, slowing the coronavirus, keeping my business running, sheltering in place. And then after that, oh my gosh, I have to find groceries and get that, prepare meals, trying to keep my house in a decent shape so I can get some work done. But to be honest, my kids' schooling was not my top priority, I have to say. And if they can hear me in the background, I don't know if they would agree, but I had to kind of deal with my own situation first before I could get to the routines. So just being, aware of what our parents might be going through and what you're going through as well as a teacher to begin to address all of our challenges right now are really important. And to that end, I've discovered and I've kind of shared that we've all got to be okay with just being good enough right now. We can't be perfect. And I made a table when my kids' school district was just scaling up distance learning, just the number of links I had to go to and the number of classes to check and see what was happening with their work. Where did I have to go to find out what was happening with my own kids' learning? And again, I'm a native English speaker. I've got an advanced degree, And I used to teach in the same school district where my kids are. And this was frustrating. So if you add up the numbers, I had to go to 34 places to have a sense of what my kids had to keep up with. And that was a lot. And so I want to leave you a final thought that no matter what's happening, kids are going to keep learning. No matter, what we're doing, if the technology might fail or a lesson might fail, or maybe a student didn't understand what to do on a packet. But our kids are going to keep learning. Our English learners are super resilient. Like I mentioned, with some of the opportunities, we might not see this all as an opportunity, but I think that there are going to be some things that carry over into face-to-face instruction when we come back. Here are pixelated pictures, for example, of my own kids. The kid on the left, she is an introvert, and she is now she's fostering dogs. We've had 2 dogs in the house that she takes the lead on. The kid in the middle is actually writing letters and to her friends, and we're going to reach out to some treatment centers, some nursing homes, and see, can she and her friends write to patients in nursing homes? And I'm getting them out, and we have the benefit of having a backyard, so I'm getting them all out and doing as much as they can outside, of course, when they're not doing Minecraft or Roblox. But there have been, I noticed some of you are sharing, what are a couple of positives that have come out? And I'm trying to, write down a couple of things I'm grateful for and try to keep that focus as well. And finally, I just wrote a new blog post today, and the link to that is below, about what's worked for me so far as a mom in distance learning. So, and I categorized it into 3 buckets that I call the 3 C's: communication, clarity, and computers. And this is not, what teachers should do. This is just, sifting through all of this. I have to make sense of things. I have to categorize things. And this is what's worked for me. So for example, when communication home for me is simple and direct. Sometimes we get emails that are long and there are many paragraphs, and you're not sure, are they asking me to do something, or am I supposed to react to something, or is this just an update? And along those lines, it's great for me when I get the same email that my kids get. In our district, they communicate mostly by email. But my kids, I don't know about your students, they're not naturally email checkers. They're texters, right? So email is something entirely new to them in many cases. So it's been really great when I'm also getting the same emails that they are, so I can check in and kind of know what's going on. Whoops, hit the wrong button there. But also including dads when they're in the picture in these emails, and when my husband's included, it's great. Sometimes we kind of default to the mom, and that's a whole different webinar. But, this is what's been working for me. One of my kids' schools made a school schedule template that I could take and fill in with my students to know for their synchronous learning and have all of the links in one place. And so it really helps me establish a routine. And routines, like I said, are so key to be able to do this. And the next bucket is clarity. So I'll show you an example of what one of my students' teachers has done, which has been awesome. She's provided one document or a slide with all of the links you need in one place, which has been great. So, and then also what's been helpful to me is having all assignments due for the week at once. And also, as a parent, having that weekend time, because parents like me, we can't always be there with our kids during the work week if it's a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 work week. Then we have some catch-up time on the weekend, and that way we can kind of plan the week to the degree possible. I know it's not always possible, but that's been really helpful, just establishing routines. And then I've seen some teachers give some scaffolded videos of their directions, where they're also, and I'll show you what this looks like next, providing a transcript in the format. So, for example, in YouTube, a transcript, so you can also not only hear the directions but see them as well. And finally, the computer piece. So 3 things that have been helpful to me are having short links. So being able to use a website like Bitly or tinyURL to shorten links to assignments, which have been great, because sometimes for whatever reason with technology, I'll have to, or my kid will have to manually type in links. And when they're short, it's just so much easier than, long multi-letter links. Also, with the number of platforms, a lot of teachers are taking the time to kind of try out some new stuff, which is awesome. But for me as a parent, it's been helpful then after kind of that trial period when teachers stick with maybe, a couple of different platforms, so we're not figuring out a lot of new things at once. And then my final piece for me is having functional documents. So not necessarily pretty, but, for me, when permissions are all set up and when passwords are easy to figure out, it's really made it so much more of a focus on the content for my kids. And again, this is what it looked like for me. And so I wanted to just end, and this is my final piece before I turn it over to Larry, wanted to end with just an example of a scaffolded video with directions. So this is from my 7th grade daughter's math teacher, Ms. Martinez, and she has everything in place for the week, what students need to do, and reminders and updates, and she includes that great social emotional piece, I miss seeing you, and she also then gives a 2-minute video and walks through and clicks on the links and just shows students what to do. So it's been, it was really made it clear and was wonderful to see. And this would also, of course, be wonderful scaffolds for English learners. So this wraps up my portion. And again, thanks so much. I'm Diane Stair-Fenner, and I'll be sticking around for questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Larry.
Thanks, Diane. It's great to be here. Hope everyone's doing well. If you're on the East Coast, you've probably finished up a day of teaching. And if you're on the West Coast with me, you're probably in the middle of it. I'm going to talk about the do's and don'ts of teaching ELLs through remote learning. And before I get into that, I'm going to talk about a do and don't that is not on this slideshow, which I learned today. There was an internet outage where I teach here in Sacramento, but I decided to teach my live class of newcomers anyway through my cell phone and using data. That is a don't. It is a new don't. Don't do that. A do is cancel the class. Students were great, but teaching a class through data does not work, and it gave me a sense, though, of what it's like for some of my students who do not have internet access, high-speed internet access, and have to access my class through their own data. It's very easy now for students to choose not to participate in our classes. If they're not doing elder care, working to help out because their parents lost their jobs, or when they're not doing child care, sleep, TV, and video games can be very attractive options. Now, lots of our students come to school for the social connection primarily, not for the academic learning. That social connection is gone. So, given that, what are some do's and don'ts? 1, do make it student-driven. Okay? This time of year, generally, in my ELL newcomer class, we'd be talking about a unit on animals and on jobs, and then get into writing stories and listening to stories. Threw that out the window. And the first day I had a live class, I asked students what they wanted to learn. And they talked about the coronavirus, jobs, sports, military, because some of them are interested in our JROTC program. And that's fine. I can teach reading, writing, listening, speaking, using any topic at all. Okay? So Are these topics the ones that I would choose in terms of what I think would be best, most helpful in their academic development? No. But I want them to be engaged right now. I want them to come to the class. So I want it to be on topics that they are interested in doing. One of the key elements in developing intrinsic motivation for students is autonomy. An easy way to provide autonomy is choice. So for independent activities that I want students to do outside of my class or in asynchronous classes, I give them a choice. So I ask students to spend 15 minutes a day on either Brain Pop, Raz Kids, or English Central. Okay? And so don't just mandate one independent activity. If you do synchronous classes, it's be great to do it for newcomers, if you can. They need that English input. You know, it's hard to start learning a language on your own. I mean, I can't imagine if I was starting in Spanish, learn Spanish that way. But especially with a language that's as crazy as English. And probably no one else in the family speaks English. So they need that input, if you can. Okay? But don't kill yourself doing synchronous classes for everybody. I think, most students who are not newcomers could get a lot out of asynchronous classes. Keep those synchronous classes short, simple, and fun. Leave them wanting more. I mean, I started a class with a question. What did you do yesterday? With a sentence stem, I did yesterday, or yesterday I asked the question of one student, they answer, they ask the question of another student, and we spend the first several minutes doing that. And then I have a short lesson, literally a few minutes. Like today we were doing it, or we would have, if I was able to access the internet, we would have done a lesson on how to shop safely with labeled pictures, of physical distancing, social distancing, and wiping off shopping carts. And then I would have them write sentences about the pictures in the chat box and do some gentle corrections while they were doing that. Then we'd end with a game. I use quizzes. They go to a link that I've set up a game that reinforces the vocabulary that we learned. They play the game, and then we do a little ritual closing the class. Everybody applauds. It works really well. Students like it. I mean, God, last Friday, students were disappointed that when I said, "Are we going to have a class tomorrow?" I said, "No, we're not going to have a class tomorrow." So I think it's just really important to keep in mind, especially that we can all be really good teachers in the physical classroom, but that doesn't necessarily mean that what we do in the physical classroom is going to play out well online. I've been sitting in on some online classes of teachers who I know are great teachers in the physical classroom, but are not necessarily adapting for online. In my class, I don't speak for more than 2 or 3 minutes at the most before students have to do something. They've got to write in the chat box. They've got to repeat. They've got to do something. They've got to go look for something in their house that starts with the letter B that they can show. But that high-level interaction is really critical, I think. Diana was talking about the challenge of maintaining attention. Do create opportunities for students to connect informally. Right? I was finding that in my class, I would tell people, okay, wait, if you have any questions about technical stuff or whatever, stay after class in the video conference. And then the whole class would stay after class. Only 1 or 2 had questions, but everybody wanted to stay for that social connection. So I might end the class a minute or 2 early, and then everybody would just stay on for 10 minutes, just to sort of chat. Someone plays some music, do a little dance party, I showed some dance moves, and students keep on asking me they want to see me do it again, and it isn't because I'm a good dancer. Because they want to make fun of me. So sometimes I give in. Make time for individual conversations with students. Every Monday, I meet with each student for 15 minutes on the video conference or on the phone. And it's really critical. And I always lead not talking about classwork, talking about their lives. How are they doing? Have they spent some time at home thinking about their futures? What do they want to do? What can they do to get there? We talk about classwork too. We talk about what they did, the homework, and what they didn't. But the lead is about their lives and their future. I think just limiting student interactions to group chats, text, or email are just not going to fly if we really want to be present to our students and if we want to move them forward and if we want to support them in their social and emotional health. Connect with families regularly. Okay? I talk to families, often. If a student doesn't show up for my live class, I'll immediately call them, the student and the parent, afterwards, not to scold, but just to make sure that everything's okay. And the same thing with my asynchronous classes. I'm in regular conversation with both students and families about what's going on with their lives. If you need tech for translation, I think the Google Assistant app on the iPhone with their interpreter, you just call the family up on a landline and have the Google Assistant interpreter app on your phone. It can work. It's not ideal, but it works really well. And again, don't rely on text, emails, or robocalls to contact families. I'm also going to suggest another do or don't. I guess it's the don't. Don't take it personally if families don't return your call, your first call, your second call, your third call. A lot of our families are dealing with figuring out how to get food on the table. They've lost their jobs. They can't pay their rent. Returning my call could be very low on the priority list. And if I was in their position, I'd feel the same way. Recognize and accept that some of our efforts will fail and flop. Okay, it's none of our lessons. Do be satisfied with trying your best. Okay, I'm viewing this time as a way to try out what we're going to do for the next 2 years until we get a vaccine. Okay, we're just trying things out. Don't make perfect the enemy of the good. Don't beat yourself up. If I beat myself up every time one of my lessons flopped, I'd be a bloody mess. So I want to do a few. There's a video and an infographic. Lydia was gracious enough to create these slides for me. I sent her the text, and she knew that life is crazy as it is for all of us who were teaching. That she was gracious enough to make this, and I didn't review it as carefully as I should. So here's a video that I did for Ed Week, along with a great infographic Wendy Pillars did. So ways to support ELLs who don't have internet access. I want to preface this by saying these are the ideas that I would start off with if I was in this position. All my English language learner students now have internet access. And they actually did from the very beginning. Maybe they had data and not internet. And so with all of my ideas that I start off with, some of these will be really good, some of these will be okay, and some of these just won't work at all. So if I was teaching ELLs who didn't have internet access, here are some things that I would do. I would tell my district as gently as I could to get its act together to provide internet access and hotspots and hardware to students. Last Friday, our high school distributed 700 Chromebooks out of a population of 1,700 students. Fortunately, Comcast is providing 2 months of free internet access to students. Use Brailleia, and I would say that could include just watching an English movie or a show on TV with subtitles. Okay? If they're watching TV, they can get captions in Spanish. Have them watch and write summaries of what happens in the show. Have them identify key words that they've learned and write them and their definitions down in English and in their home language. Before I go on, I'd also encourage and suggest that if teachers, I'm sure there are many teachers on this webinar who do have experience working with ELLs who don't have devices or access to the internet, please put your ideas down. And I see that one other suggestion, one issue that came up in the chat is if you're in a rural area with no internet. Yeah, I can see that's a challenging situation, and I have no answers to that. But I think some of these can still be useful ideas on how to support ELLs who don't have internet access. Provide a journal where students write and maybe give them sentence starters as well. I've had students could take pictures and send what they've written to you. Provide a decent workbook. A lot of them stink, but there are some decent ELL workbooks. I like English in Action, which also provides a CD if they can play, if they have a CD player. Set them up with a library card and instructions on how to use the library if it's not closed because of COVID-19, so they can access a computer there. Help them understand how a library works so they can check out a book of their choice to read and write summaries about it, as well as identifying key new words. Send them a book. Either you or hopefully the school could buy a book that you think that they would like and be able to access in their home. Even better, send an English version and another version in their home language to help them understand the higher level books. Older students, reading little kids' books is not very energizing. But getting a higher level book in both idioms and looking through the same thing can be really useful. And then set up a time to talk regularly to practice English conversation with the students. And I'd love to look at the group chat later to see what ideas other people have to add to this list. Okay, one of the challenges is ELLs and content classes. As we all know, a lot of content teachers have big challenges providing enough scaffolding to students in the physical classroom. Many of them aren't going to have a clue about how to provide scaffolding to ELLs in their content classes, or it's just not going to be a priority with everything else they're dealing with. And I can understand that. Providing graphic organizers and models for everything that's assigned in Google Classroom. And again, as we all know, good ELL teaching is good for everybody. So these strategies can help both English language learners and non-ELLs in everybody's classroom. Use closed captioning in live sessions. If they're going to communicate with their students and outside of class, I think Microsoft Translator is great, where it's text by you say it in your language and they see it as text in your language. Say it in my language, you hear it in you see it in your language, and it's free. Use text engineering for materials. Create a lot of white space. Add bold headings. Add vocabulary definitions at the bottom. Provide sentence starters, sentence frames, writing structures. Writing frames are basically big sentence frames. Writing structures are ones that provide guidance of what goes where. So if you do like an ABC paragraph, answer the question, back it up, make a comment. That's a writing structure. Building background knowledge. When I teach social studies to English language learners, the week before I'm going to teach the class, there's plenty of resources available online from a textbook. It may not be the textbook that I'm using, but it follows the same basic information, and there will be summaries in Hmong, Vietnamese, Farsi, and I'll give students those summaries ahead of time. Or do videos, right, in those languages. Brain Pop has it in Spanish. Lots of other resources. Khan Academy in Math has it in multiple. Have students look at those ahead of time before the English lesson to help provide the background knowledge that students need. And then, of course, share videos that students can watch multiple times. So that, lots of other resources at my websites of the day blog and my EdWeek blog. And feel free to contact me on Twitter. I think I've got some links on the webinar resource page. And now I will turn it over to Lydia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Larry, and thank you, Diane, for sharing so many great resources. And as we mentioned at the beginning, this is all collected in one place. You'll see your resource links on your dashboard, and so you can get some of those resources there. But there's also a link that says Distance Learning for ELLs webinar resources, and so everything we're talking about is there in one place. So you can keep focusing on the content, which I know there are a lot of great ideas coming through. And I would say that following the blogs that both Larry and Diane are doing, it's a fabulous way to kind of keep up as things are going. And like Larry's Education Week blog, he has been posting, he's so prolific, I don't know when he sleeps, but he's been posting regularly updates from other educators and compiling them. And, it's sort of been day by day, what's working, what's not working. We're 1 month into this, we're 6 weeks into this. So it really is a play-by-play capsule of everything that's happening with a lot of diverse voices in there. So I highly recommend that as a great resource to follow on EdWeek as well as his blog. So for people who stick with the updates and hearing from other people, you can't do better than following what Larry and Diane are doing, I think. So thank you so much, and thank you, Giselle and AFT, for this chance to share all this information. I just want to share a few final points so that we can then move on to our question and answer period. And Giselle shared that Going Colorado is a public media project. We're based at PBS station and WETA in Washington, D.C., and we've been working with the AFT since the beginning of our project, and we now also work with the NEA. And so what this means is that we have a wonderful pool of educators who can share their insights and their experiences. And that has been invaluable during this time because we've been able to kind of get real-time updates of what's going on and what people's concerns are about what is happening. And so I just want to share briefly a little bit about what we have been doing in the last 2 months. The first thing was to compile the multilingual resources that are out there about the virus. And there are a number of things. Certainly there's a lot in English and Spanish together, but many, many other languages. And this is really important because one thing that we have heard is that when teachers connect with families, they don't always have up-to-date information on how to stay safe or what social distancing is. And one teacher reported back that her students were all visiting each other's houses during the day so they could all spend time together. And so, if you think about how much messaging we've heard about the things that we should be doing to stay safe, I don't think anybody can hear it enough. So sharing resources, making sure people understand what they need to do to stay safe to the extent that they can. Of course, many are working and many kids are working. But just being familiar with what's available in the family's languages is a really important first step. So we have a lot compiled. There may be other things in your community that serve your local communities. So that's one thing. We've also been working on what are all the ELL considerations around school closures and distance learning, communicating with families. And so when you see the resources that we've compiled, you'll see a lot of that information in one place. We have a new guide on distance learning, and we have strategies for both online and offline learning. And Larry was talking about the situation of rural schools where there's not a lot of internet or other situations. We actually have a new great article about offline options and what people are doing, some really creative ideas, and how they're sharing those resources. So it's been exciting to see that come together, as well as the online component. What are some options, ways that you can engage with your students? And a needs assessment. So you could go in and say, okay, what are the areas that we need to focus on? What's happening with our students that we know that time and energy are limited. How can we prioritize what we need to do? We're also looking at concerns around privacy, and I'll talk about a little in just a moment, but we do have a resource collection on those issues now. So these are some of the big picture things that we've been looking at from our collection. And as Larry was saying, it would be hard to learn a language right now. You can imagine going through a public health crisis if you don't have updated information about what you need to do to stay safe, what you need to do to kind of keep things running in your household, and then what needs to be happening with your child's learning at home that you're supposed to be supporting. It's just an overwhelming challenge for all of us who do speak English and who kind of know our school systems. And it's such a monumental task. And we have heard feedback from some families who say, all we know is that our school is closed. And so we know there are a lot of people who are making heroic efforts to communicate, but there are a lot of places where that is falling through. So it's never a bad idea to just go back to basics and see what's happening. So briefly, as Diane and Larry mentioned, I think trying different things. This is definitely thinking outside the box time: postcards, phone calls, texting, email, social media. Sometimes a student or a family, another parent, may be able to connect you with a family, which is not to say that everybody should be sharing contact information all around, but simply to say, hey, are you in touch with so-and-so? Would you let them know that I've been trying to get in touch with them? Sometimes those networks are stronger than we realize between the students and the families. We heard one story of a teacher who had a pizza delivered with contact information attached, and she actually did from that family. So you never know what's going to work, and as Larry said, it's just something we just have to keep trying. And we're not going to hear back from everybody, and sometimes you hear back and then things fall off, but just keeping at it is important. And in terms of translation, some people are not very familiar with what's available in their district, but if that's the case, then finding out what does your district have as an interpreter's liaison, is there a hotline? Many people are using the Talking Points app, which is an app that the teacher downloads, not the family. You put the message in English and send a text message in the family's language to their phone. So they just get a text message. And it's been, I think, pretty well received and used by a lot of teachers and families. An app is not a great place for really complicated information or sensitive personal information, but for quick check-ins or questions, it may work, and it may said, school districts are legally required to provide families with information in a language they understand. And I have posted some of the legal guidance on that on our website, just in case anyone needs a reminder to share with a district leader or a school leader. Sometimes we have to put on the advocacy hat and say, this is something that we're supposed to be doing. It's hard right now. There's so many different things that are happening, but the families do have a right to get this information in their language. We've also heard that students are doing a lot of translation, and of course it's understandable how that would happen. Again, it's just not an appropriate situation, and so the extent that we can be looking for other options is really important. And there are, using automatic translation sites is a kind of a good stopgap measure, but it is not foolproof. I briefly just want to mention some families are very concerned about the amount of work their students are getting, especially at the secondary level, and the teachers and the administrators who may be kind of mandating what's happening may not understand all of the challenges that we've been speaking about today with childcare working schedules. The students may be doing the work at night and completing it, but may not be online on the day. But the fact that ELL families are actually expressing their concern just gives you an idea that this is another area of stress. And so helping people understand what families are working with, what's an appropriate level of work, that can really be helpful. Internet connections for immigrant families, there are a couple concerns. Some may have online privacy concerns, and I will just say sometimes telecommunications data has been used, particularly in the last couple of years, for monitoring undocumented families. And so that may be an area of concern. And some of the internet companies who are offering free wireless connections or free Wi-Fi are asking for Social Security or no past due notices. Again, you can imagine undocumented families may really not be in a position to either provide that information or want to. And so anything that increases access across the board is helpful, whether that's hotspots. We heard one story of a school that made their school Wi-Fi available. The parents were going to the school to pick up packets, and so when they were in the parking lot, they could access the Wi-Fi. They could download, I think, an audio file with instructions for the packets from the teacher. So they had the instructions, they had the packet, they had the Wi-Fi while they needed it, and then they went home. So that obviously that's not a scenario that works everywhere, but I think the fewer hoops there are for families to jump through, the more likely they will be to use those resources. And just because the device and the internet is available doesn't mean that everyone's going to be using it. Finally, I just want to give a shout out to the ELL bilingual educators who are out there. We know that everyone is doing such a great job right now. We have a front seat to this particular field of profession. They are creative. They know how to differentiate content. They know their families. They know their students often better than anyone else in the building. They have experience advocating, collaborating. And so if this is you, just know that you are bringing so much to this moment. If this is not you, know that there's a wonderful team member there who's available to collaborate with you. And they are often undersung heroes because people don't know what they do. So we just want to make sure that everybody is mindful of that. Finally, we have a survey up. There's a link there if you have the chance. We'd love for you to fill it out to hear what we're doing. And then we have a great social media info on our Facebook group as well as Twitter and the ELL chat hashtag. Also a hashtag on Twitter chat on Monday nights at 9 p.m. is a great resource. So as I said, all this is online. And now I will turn it back over to Giselle for our Q&A.
Thank you so much for such a great presentation, Lydia, Larry, and Diane. So much rich information, and so glad that this will be archived so that people can go back and others will be able to access it. The first question I have here is, I work in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. My students have Chromebooks and hotspots if they don't have Wi-Fi. Many of the ELLs just have not logged on for the last 6 weeks. We have called, texted, emailed, had translators call. What are we missing? How do we engage our ELLs? So Larry, go ahead, please.
Well, I don't know if I have any answers on that. If you're calling, I guess one of the questions is, what are the kind of messages and what are the kind of calls that are being made? If it's a call of how are you doing? Are you okay? That I think that is pretty critical to have that tone in outreach to parents and students, as opposed to why haven't you signed on? Obviously I don't know the details of the situation, but I think that is a critical piece of any kind of outreach that's made.
Great. Thank you, Larry. And unfortunately, we don't have, endless time, so we have to keep our answers brief. Our next question comes from Prince George's County in Maryland. How do we support parents who have no idea how they can support their children? Diane, go ahead.
So in terms of supporting parents not knowing how they can support their kids, I think first of all, just affirming that we know they're doing everything they can. and just encouraging them to keep speaking with them in the home language. This is what we want them to be doing, and to listen to their kids, have their kids talk to them about what they might be doing in school, helping set a routine for learning, maybe a specific, couple of hour, or even an hour once a day, where the kids can start to focus on their schoolwork, would be a great start. And then checking in with them, maybe if you can, weekly, to see how it's going once the routine has been established to the degree possible, knowing it's just not going to work just sometimes. Like Larry said, sometimes lessons will flop. Well, sometimes parents won't be able to reap the rewards that they immediately want to. So I think just, checking in and saying, hey, it's okay, and keeping the social emotional aspect front and center, I think, is the key.
Super. Thank you, Diane. And let's see here. This question comes to us from Pike Lake Kindergarten. What resources do you recommend for kindergarten? I teach at a kindergarten center and have 71 EL students. I have found some things that work, but always looking for more. Lydia?
I would say, and I'm sorry I can't say exactly grades specifically, but we are compiling a number of early childhood resources, and I think there's we're getting mixed information about whether people are trying to get online devices for kindergarten, first grade, or not. And so there are platforms for young children who are using the technology, but in a lot of cases they're not. So we have a number of resources about offline learning activities, early literacy. We also have a series of tip sheets with reading for family tips in 13 different languages. And so I think one of the key things that one of our early childhood advisors has shared is really think about using the home as a learning environment. And there are a lot of things that can be done in terms of measuring recipes and water play and early literacy, letter recognition on things around the houses. So I know this isn't exactly a kindergarten curriculum, but I think in the absence necessarily of having a plan, it's really working with the families to say, what are you already doing that's supporting kids' learning, which we know families are doing things already. What are the songs in their native languages and other kind of early literacy. But I don't know, Larry and Diane, is there anything else I'm missing that's kind of grade specific here?
Well, the only thing that I would say that I have seen some pretty ridiculous curriculum put out by some districts for K to 2. So hopefully you are not working in one of those districts that have incredibly insane curriculums with super high and ridiculous expectations.
And I think that's the key, right? We don't want to overwhelm the parents, the teachers, the kids, and finding that balance. I would rather see a kindergartner engaged in a book they like to read on their own than having to do worksheet upon worksheet of repetition.
Great. Thank you for those great insights. Here's a question on paraprofessionals. As a paraprofessional, what can you do to help alleviate the load of work that the teachers are making the students complete without doing it for them? Larry, do you want to take this question?
I think the role of a paraprofessional, depending upon the kind of relationship you have with the teacher, encourage the teacher to try to figure out scaffolds. And if the teacher is not able to do that, and maybe does not understand or have the experience to do that, share some ideas of scaffolds like sentence frames, writing structures, engineering the text, and clarify with the teacher that he or she is okay with you providing that, which any good teacher probably would be. if they're serious about having their students be able to access the content, which they are required to make sure that their content is accessible to their students.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Larry. Here is a really hard question. I have a student from Pompeii. He speaks very little English, and Pompeian is an extremely rare language. We cannot get connected to him or his family, and most do not know how to help him. Any suggestions? Diane?
Oh, no, you assigned me the hard one. I was like, oh, gosh. Just thinking, I would go back to some of Larry's suggestions mentioned earlier. If there's perhaps a neighbor who can get in touch with the students. I love the delivering the pizza idea that I heard, some way to reach out. And again, like Larry said, just see how it's going. If there's anyone, this kind of speaks to how do we get creative about interpreters. Is there, for example, like a local university or a hospital or a religious organization nearby that might have someone who speaks the home language who could reach out in it to try to help out and make a connection with the student? But piggybacking on that is I've read that in many districts, sometimes 25% of students just have not shown up for lessons or been reachable right now. So we're going to, as Larry said earlier, we might be in some kind of blended or distance learning mode now until there is a vaccine. So these are questions we're going to have to grapple with. So I really look to everyone attending the webinar. You've been sharing such wonderful examples and resources, but this is a time for us to come together and grapple with some of these issues.
And I will add that it is a school district's responsibility, it is the law, to provide an education to students regardless of the language they speak. So it is the district's responsibility to find a translator, and certainly Pompeian is not the only rare language out there. But if the district is not responsible, then I would suggest going to your union and getting them to advocate on your student's behalf with the district. And let's see, we have time for one more question. Let me see. How do you address the trauma that students might be going through? And I'm going to ask Lydia to address this question, since we have been putting a lot of materials on Coloring Colorado around trauma.
I think one first step is acknowledging it as trauma, and acknowledging that for a lot of kids, this whole situation is going to be traumatic, whether or not they had experienced trauma in their lives before. And then acknowledging for other kids, this trauma may be layered on top of other traumas they've had in the past. And for other kids, it's going to exacerbate those traumas if those were related to instability or a lot of moving around. For example, for students who maybe had interrupted education, displacement, refugees, there are going to be a lot of layers. And so I think acknowledging that, recognizing that, so that schools can begin to develop the responses is really important. And this comes back to the checking in with the families as well, just having that basic information. How are the kids doing? How are the families doing? Collecting that information over time is going to help us paint a better picture of how we respond and keeping up the relationships. And I think we don't know how kids are going to respond over time, and we don't know what it's all going to look like when we come back together. And so rather than to say we have answers now, here are some steps we can be taking to collect that information, checking in, sharing ideas, and then using what we know about trauma to help inform those decisions. But I would also defer to Diane and Larry if they have any other thoughts there.
We're taking it all in, Lydia. Yeah.
Super. And as I said before, we are just so grateful for all the participants on this webinar. We are sorry that we couldn't get to all of your questions. There are just so many, and we're going to be doing our best to address many of these on Coloring Colorado. So please log on and check it frequently. We have, I want to thank our panelists. This was just wonderful. And I have 2 more items for our participants. We appreciate your feedback and have 2 easy ways we appreciate your feedback. So please take the survey that will show up on your screen momentarily. This feedback is valuable for our speakers and to us as we plan future webinars. And please visit the registration page for this session on Share My Lesson and add your own rating and review to help others. Finally, if you're interested in more professional learning opportunities, be on the lookout for information on the AFT Share My Lesson Summer of Learning webinar series in July. And with that, I want to thank everyone and thank you all at home for tuning in. Thank you so much.